a Senior Policy Advisor for Climate Action and Energy at the European Investment Bank, the Brussels office. This is the second event under the EIB Group Breakfast Briefings Climate and Environment Series to bring to you new or existing initiatives the EIB Group is working on in the context of the Climate Bank Roadmap. Today, my colleagues Alexandrina Boyanova and Céline Bru, climate officers at our Operations Directorate, will present the recently launched EIB Path Framework, our framework for Paris alignment of our counterparties. There will be a 15-minute presentation followed by a Q&A. To ask questions after the presentation, you can do that orally, for which you have to click on the raise hand button. This event is being recorded and the link will be made available to you later. Without any further delay, I leave the floor to Céline and Alexandrina to tell us all about the Path Framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, also from my side. I hope that everybody is doing okay, at least to the extent possible in the current circumstances. As introduced by Monica, we're here today to speak about EIB Group Path Framework, i.e. how we support our counterparties on their pathways to align with the Paris Agreement. I'm here today with Céline, my colleague, and we will share the slides that you will see in the next 15 minutes. Next slide, please, Céline. To set the scene, let us briefly recall again the four main pillars of EIB's enhanced climate ambition. As you may recall, in November 2019, we announced our transformation from the EU Bank Financing Climate to the EU Climate Bank. We did so by making four important commitments. First, we committed to align all our operations with the Paris Agreement starting 2021. We also committed to stop supporting traditional fossil fuel projects by the end of 2021. We committed to reach 50% of climate action and environmental sustainability lending in the next 5 years by 2025 and beyond. And we also committed to support at least €1 trillion of climate action and environmental sustainability investments during the critical decade by 2030. Next slide, please. What followed was the adoption of the Climate Bank Roadmap in November 2020. It describes in detail how are we going to deliver upon and operationalize our commitments. As set out in the CBR, the principal way in which we can support transition is through the provision of finance and advisory services to invest in Paris-aligned projects. Our Climate Bank Roadmap provides a very clear interpretation of the alignment in the context of EIB Group projects and products. EIB Group support does not, however, end with a project alone. It is important to situate it within the context of our counterparties' wider corporate activities and their impact on the environment. We therefore committed in the Climate Bank Roadmap to develop a framework to assess and support our counterparties' alignment with the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. PATH was approved by EIB's Board of Directors in October 2021. And it was announced at COP26 in Glasgow. It applies to the bank's new operations starting January 2021. And what you can see on this slide is a summary of PATH's key features. First of all, in line with the principles of the Paris Agreement, it covers both low carbon as well as resilient aspects. Similar to our low carbon project framework, PATH applies equally to counterparties from inside as well as outside the EU. As a first step, PATH focuses on the most relevant counterparties, namely the high-emitting corporates and the significant financial institution. Our approach is therefore targeted and proportionate. And the overarching aim of the framework is to engage with counterparties that are either aligning or willing to align with the goals of the Paris Agreement. It does not, therefore, intend to restrict support only to those counterparts that are already aligned. This reflects the goal of the Paris Agreement itself to make finance flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions. And finally, PATH focuses on transparency. As we observe, the regulatory framework towards corporate sustainability reporting and climate-related disclosures is evolving fast. PATH aligns with these developments as much as possible. In particular, it builds closely on the existing and anticipated disclosure requirements within the EU, namely the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, as well as the growing importance of reporting practices based on the recommendations of the TCFD. And here we have taken inspiration from the European Central Banks and the European Banking Authority's climate-related expectations. Next slide, please. While PATH encourages the transition by enabling and empowering our counterparties to develop their own transition plan, there needs to be a bottom line. For instance, it is difficult for a counterparty to defend a plan to decarbonize over time if at the same time this counterparty continues to invest in new significantly polluting assets, as is the case, for example, with new coal-fired power plants. Therefore, under the PATH framework, the EIB will not, in general, support projects with a corporate that continues to engage in incompatible activities, as they are set out on the slide. Our support to these counterparties would be limited to very specific, I would say, exceptional circumstances when it involves highly innovative, low-carbon projects, which are critical to the achievement of the net zero emissions globally. Céline, I hand over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So, as mentioned by Alexandrina, PATH is centered on encouraging the transition by enabling and empowering counterparties to develop their own transition plans. And it is for each corporate to define and explain the alignment strategy. So with this in mind, the PATH framework is developed around the public disclosure of two crucial elements, which EIB considers essential for a credible decarbonization plan. So the first one is to have a midterm rolling quantitative emission reduction target 5 to 10 years into the future included in the decarbonization plan. So while PATH does not prescribe the speed of the transition, it does require counterparties to motivate publicly the ambition of their midterm carbon target if their annual emission reductions are less than 4.2% per year. This corresponds to the global emission reductions required to keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees. It's also important that the company makes reference to future actions or options to accelerate decarbonization over a longer time horizon to achieve carbon neutrality towards mid-century. And then the role of offsetting is also, well, we require them to be clearly presented in the transition plan, in particular the impact of offsetting on the proposed target. And finally, the plan should also indicate to the extent possible how the proposed alignment strategy takes into account of the interests of the stakeholders, including in particular social partners. And disclosure on these issues can help inform and shape measures to ensure a just transition. A similar approach is also taken with respect to corporate operating in a context of high vulnerability to current and future physical impacts of climate change. And in line with the evolving as well regulation and global reporting practices, such as the TCFD recommendation, it is for each corporate also to determine its management approach towards physical climate risks and disclose accordingly. And finally, corporates in scope of the PATH framework are required to create and publish a decarbonization plan or resilience plan within 12 months of the EIB finance contract signatures. For financial institutions, in line with global trends, EIB Group requires them to disclose in line with the TCFD recommendations within 12 months from signature. So, in the case of national promotional institutions, because they are our partner institutions, the EIB Group seeks to engage in a dialogue with them. And where helpful, the EIB Group can assist financial institutions to meet these PATH requirements, and technical assistance can be provided to help develop a reporting framework. This may be particularly useful as well for smaller intermediaries and also for those operating outside the Europe. So in a nutshell, what is the EIB Group engagement approach? When engaging with counterparties in scope of the PAS framework, EIB Group enables and empowers our counterparties to take action. It promotes transparency and accountability to stakeholders. It provides also flexibility in timing outside the Europe for those counterparts located in these regions by reflecting as well the principle of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capacities, which is central to the Paris Agreement. And finally, it provides support with technical assistance as well. So to conclude, with the adoption of the PAS framework, the EIB Group delivers on an important commitment made in the Climate Bank Roadmap. The EIB Group is the first MDB to tackle the issue both at project and counterparty level to address the wider activities of clients and help them to decarbonize their businesses or manage physical climate risks in this way. We will continue to share our experience with other MDBs as part of the wider harmonization of activities. And finally, PAS reinforces EIB Group support to EU sustainable finance policy with the development of the PAS framework. So this is the end of our presentation. I think now we can reply to any question you may have. So don't hesitate to raise your hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandrina and Celine, for the presentation. I see for the moment there are no questions, so I will ask a question myself. Because you said that, well, the PATH framework, it applies both inside to our clients inside the EU and outside EU. So I was wondering, do you see any challenges with the implementation of the framework outside the EU, and how are we planning to address them? Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Monica. This is indeed a very relevant question that was also raised by our governing bodies. Prior to the adoption of the PATH, while developing it, we conducted interviews with different types of counterparts of different sizes, from different industries, from different geographies. And we indeed identified that counterparts from Central and Southeast Europe, as well as from the outside EU, would need technical assistance to be able to develop decarbonization plans in the case of corporates and TCFD type of reporting in the case of banks. EIB is ready to provide such technical assistance free of charge because we do realize that most of these counterparts are lagging behind their Western European equivalents. We take into account the different starting points and also the less advanced regulatory framework, in particular outside the EU, and we will offer the set technical assistance package, as well as some flexibility in the timing to produce the plan and the TCFD type of reporting. As Celine mentioned in one of the last slides, for those counterparts outside the EU, we could potentially extend the 12-month period because we need to take into account the timing that those counterparts, mostly public sector counterparts, need to engage with the national authorities. In most cases, the decisions that are taken to implement one or the other decarbonization plan are very much influenced by the government. And of course, it takes time to make these consultations with the government. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandrina. Now I see Ero Sawe from DG Clima, who wants to ask a question. Please, Ero, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you. I've seen the framework before, but just one thing which kind of triggered my interest, which I hadn't registered. On the corporate alignment strategy, you mentioned that there is the reduction percentage of 4.2% for basically across the board. And I mean, this is a discussion we've had quite a few times in different contexts, for example, for the EU benchmarks side, which has a different number. And then there's a question of whether different sectors should have different strategies. So maybe you could kind of explain why you went for that kind of cross-cutting number, and if there are other sector-specific expectations underneath also. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. Just for the sake of clarity, the 4.2% is a reference point. It's a pure benchmark. So this is, of course, this corresponds to the 1.5 degree scenario, and this is indeed a reference point for all the industries. This being said, again, we do not prescribe the precise ambition of the target that each of the companies needs to take. It's up to them to take that decision and justify it accordingly. We would expect that in the power sector, where the decarbonization alternatives are available and they're even cheaper than the conventional ones, that our counterparts would be more advanced and would be more ambitious with the decarbonization. Other industries that do not necessarily have decarbonization alternatives, or these decarbonization alternatives are not yet affordable and at a very early stage of development, we would understand, of course, that they would not be able to achieve this emission reduction rate. But we would expect them to publicly disclose what the motivation for their target is, what are the specific circumstances of the industry, of the region, of the respective geography, so that the stakeholders themselves can make a decision whether the plan that the counterpart has disclosed is credible or not. But this remains for us a reference point corresponding to the 1.5 degree scenario for all the industries. If I haven't fully answered your question, we have also Ed on the line, or Ed, if you want to jump in and complement my answer, please do. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I mean, Alexander, Eero looked happy. He had his thumbs up, so I think we can perhaps move on to the next question.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is from Xavier Sol from Counterbalance. Xavier, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Good morning, and thanks for organizing this event. I would have two questions. The first one in terms of the implementation, because I think there are a lot of interesting elements in the PAF framework, especially for corporates. First question, like, are you already starting to implement that? And what are, the challenges you identify, especially in terms of, double checking the solidity, the soundness of the decarbonization plans put forward by your clients? And then secondly, in terms of financial intermediaries, in our view, this is the weakest part of the PAF framework, because what is being put there is mostly a transparency requirement, but there is no formal requirement for the banks, funds that you support, for them to have real decarbonization strategies. So in that regard, how can you still claim that this intermediated portfolio will be Paris aligned? Because at the moment it's only a transparency requirement. So on that one, yeah, I would just have to get your reaction, and maybe to understand where you see some blockades in getting further and asking similar type of requirements to your direct clients and to those intermediaries. Thanks in advance.
Thank you, Xavier. Again, two very good questions. On the first one regarding the implementation, yes, both for corporates and financial institutions, PAF is already under implementation starting January 2022. Just to specify that it applies for all new new appraisals taking place this year. Of course, operations and transactions that are already under appraisal, where we have already engaged with the counterparts. The old rules apply. This being said, you know yourself, I'm sure you have followed that even before the adoption of the path, we were applying its principles to the most polluting counterparts. We have introduced the decarbonization plan requirement also prior to the adoption of the path for those counterparts that we thought was relevant. As mentioned during the presentation, we have even engaged with the most relevant counterparts at the design phase of the path. We have spoken to different large and small emitters throughout Europe and outside the EU. Actually, quite a few of them, especially from the power industry, the large corporates, are already fully aligned and very advanced with their decarbonization plans. I will not quote specific names, but they all appear aligned on SBTi's database. Most of them in line with a 1.5 degree scenario. They have fully fledged sustainability reports. They are being very transparent about their intentions, about the progress of their plans. So even when we looked into our 2019 and 2020 annual signatures, we were pleasantly surprised that most of these, that a large part of the counterparts are already fully aligned, and that most of our counterparts, even those that are not fully aligned, already have plans which contain the critical elements that we think are necessary for a credible decarbonization plan, namely a medium-term target during the critical decade, a well-justified one, as well as the long-term options how to decarbonize over the long term. On the second point regarding the financial institutions, again, a super valid point. And to be very open with you, we also started during the design process of the path with the ambition of looking already now at this first stage into the Paris alignment of our financial institutions portfolios. This being said, I'm sure you know yourself, because we have engaged with all the organizations that are developing these type of methodologies, including SBTIs. They are still in their pilot phase, at least at the time that we were working on the path with their methodology for the Paris alignment of the portfolios. The banks themselves are struggling with the collection information from their corporate counterparts. So we thought that as a very first step during the first phase of the implementation of the path, which will be reviewed, as you know, in 2023 already, when we look into the CBR review, we'll focus mostly on the TCFD disclosures. One of the pillars of TCFD is metrics and targets, and under this pillar, in the context of our assessment, but also in the exchanges that we will have with the banks, we will ask them at least the question whether they already have adopted specific metrics for the Paris alignment of their portfolios, whether using one of the engagement approaches suggested by SBTi in their methodology, or using a different approach. We have seen that also, for example, again, not to quote specific banks, but there are some of the banks that are quite advanced that have developed their own alignment methodologies for selected sectors again. So we would very much want and expect our counterparts to already have now fully developed methodologies, but we should also be realistic that because the methodology itself is very young, it hasn't been tested, it's being rolled out for the first year or for the first 6 months by SBTi. Now you have seen also exchanges between the different organizations, for example, PACTA and SBTi, what should be the correct approach. I think we owe the market this grace period, if I may call it, to adjust to the methodologies. And at the next stage, we will review whether our requirements should be more stringent in this regard. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandrina and Xavier, for the questions. I don't see at the moment any more raised hands. So, yes, there is one. Thank you, Pierre. So yes, the floor is yours, Pierre Harke.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm from BIO, so the Belgian DFI. I was wondering whether this path also applies to the external operation of the EIB. I think yes, but to which extent the EIB Global will apply that to the transactions, while in certain countries it's sometimes more complex to make it simple. And also, how do you deal with, in the case of financing of smaller financial institutions like microfinance, for instance? What's your climate approach for this kind of potential investees? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for the questions. Indeed, PATH will apply to our operations outside the EU. We have the same requirements, namely the development of a decarbonization plan for the high-emitting corporates and the adoption of TCFD reporting for the financial institutions. As mentioned slightly earlier, we have had interviews with the different clients outside the EU. Indeed, some of them are very challenged with developing a formal decarbonization plan, although they are already doing steps to improve their, in the case of the energy sector that we consulted, to improve their energy mix. So while we maintain the same requirements for both inside and outside the EU, because the global objective is one, we do realize that it may take a bit more time for them to develop the plans and to adopt them. So the flexibility that we are offering is in terms of timing, how much time they have to provide, to publicly disclose their requirement. And also we offer free of charge technical assistance to help them develop these plans and this TCFD reporting, and if need be as well engage with the national authorities, because again, most of the decisions are coming, there is very little delegation are coming from the national authorities. Regarding the application to smaller financial institutions, as mentioned, indeed, we are taking now a risk-based approach. So we are focusing on the largest financial institutions, significant banks. We have taken inspiration from the European Central Bank's definition of significant banks. So either banks that have total assets exceeding 30 billion euros, or one of the three largest banks in the country. So of course, outside the EU, we will have more the latter, smaller institutions, also in Southeast Europe. To take the example of Bulgaria, where I come from, the banks have a much smaller asset base, but we would capture them in scope through one of the three largest banks requirement, and microfinance institutions would be out of scope of the path.
They are indeed out of scope of the path, but to be maybe it's worth noting that we do have a low carbon framework in place, which ensure the Paris alignment for use of proceeds. So they don't have, I would say, a sizable balance sheet, but we ensure the Paris alignment of the projects we finance with them.
Thank you, Celine and Alexandrina. I think, well, I don't see any more hands raised at the moment.
Great, we are very disciplined and on time today, both with the presentation and the questions.
Yes,
Any
indeed.
other questions from the audience?
Yeah, I don't see any. So I think, yeah, and in fact, it's already indeed 9:30. So I think we can close it here. Of course, for the audience, if you have any questions that you think about later, you can always contact us. So thank you very much to Selina and to Alexandrina and all of you for being here and for your questions. The next climate and environment briefing will be on Friday, 8th April, on the EIB Target Initiative, which is a technical assistance initiative for regions undergoing a green energy transition. And the topics for the following sessions will be announced soon. So I see a question on the chat saying, yes, slides, yes, we will share the slides. And so thank you very much. I wish you a nice day, despite the circumstances, and a nice weekend. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.